Welcome back to part 2 for my first ever video tutorial, a pair of designer looking panties. In my previous video, I showed you how I planed the project. And I also showed you how I made the decoration at the front. We are done with the front for the moment, and ready to move on to the next stage. The next step is to attach the crotch pieces to the back piece. Since the seam here is a slight curve, we need to mark the middle point at the back. For that I used a pin to mark the spot. Then I marked the middle on both gusset pieces. As a side note, make sure you use a cotton jersey for the lining. Avoid synthetic fabrics. And it is important for the lining to be stretchy, because the main fabric, the mesh, is also stretchy. With the centers marked on each piece, I can now align the lining to the back. I matched the pins on both pieces. The front side of the gusset faces the front side of the back piece. Then I start pinning on each side. With the center spot fixed, I can now remove the marking pins. Then I arrange one edge and distribute the fabric and pins along it. I do the same for the second half of the seam. Turn the work with the back facing you, and bring the other gusset piece. Again, align at the center, then the edges, and in the end pin along the seam. While doing so, remove the pins that hold only the previous 2 layers. Basically what I did is to sandwich the back between the 2 gusset pieces. And I am ready to join this yummy sandwich together. The stitch will run along the slight curve. Remember, I am using stretch fabrics, and you must note that with the placement of this seam, at the back of the precious posterior, this area is delicate. When we walk, when we sit, climb a staircase, this seam has to stretch too. This is why it is very important to use the elastic stitch here, not the straight stitch that could break during our movement. When done sewing, open the gusset pieces and bring them together with their wrong sides facing each other. This will hide the seam allowances inside. And you get a clean finish either on the right side or against the skin. With the gusset attached to the back, we can now move on to the front. The aim is to have the same clean seam. Before that, you can see that when I cut my pieces, my front is a bit wider at the line where it should join the gusset. There are some corners on each side. I want to have a perfectly even seam on all pieces. For that I will take my scissors and carefully cut a smidge from the front, making sure I do not break the nice curve for the leg opening. To get perfect curves on each side, I will cut the excess from the other leg opening. Then, with the length adjusted on the front, we can move on to sewing a seam that is just a bit trickier. With the right sides facing you, place the pieces on the table to their correct position. Turn the front with the wrong side facing you and align it along the edge of the gusset. Now grab and hold the front and only the outer layer of the gusset. Make sure they align just fine and pin only those 2 layers in a couple of places. This seam will also be hidden. You can see the gusset lining is left hanging at the back of our work. Be careful what we do next. Open up the gusset pieces at the back and place your work on the table. Start rolling the front towards the pins, then take the back and roll that too. This will reveal the gusset lining. Now pick the gusset lining and covering the rolls, bring it and align to the seam we're working on. The pins we used earlier will be covered by the lining. That's okay. We need to perfectly align all the layers together first. Then holding steadily the layers, remove one pin and instantly pin all 3 layers at the edge. Next, use a different pin to hold the center of the seam. Adjust the layers as you go. Take out the second pin that held only the previous 2 layers and use it at this edge. You can see we trapped the front and the back between the gusset pieces. Don't worry, this is only temporary. Next we will stitch along the edge. I will use again the stretch stitch and not the straight stitch. While sewing, stop before a pin and remove it. When done stitching, clip away the threads. Remove any leftover pins and watch we do next. Insert your fingers between the gusset pieces and pick the front and the back pieces. Start pulling them through the gusset tunnel. Be gentle and do not force anything. Otherwise, it will stretch out beyond recovery. Everything will settle just fine with a bit of patience. It's looking very nice on this side that will be touching directly our skin. And if you flip the work with the right side, again, it looks very good too. With the gusset attached, I am now ready to move on. That is, to add my elastic to both leg openings and the waist. For this project, I chose a matte fold-over elastic. With fold-over elastic, you will basically hug the edges. Half of the elastic will be on the right side. The other half goes on the side where it touches directly our skin. Now, there are many kinds of fold-over elastics. You can recognize them very easily because a line separates the halves. The question remains, which side is the side you have to use on the outside? And which one is the hidden one? For this particular elastic, on one side, a half of the elastic is covered with a plush surface. It is very similar to band elastic used for bras. This means that the plush side and half goes to my skin. That nice soft touch that is perfect for underwear. The elastic will follow the curve exactly. But you can see there are some sticking corners of my seam allowances. Those need to go away. So pick the scissors and trim them, carefully blending in with the curve on the back. When done, inspect the curve. If needed, adjust again. Then move to the other leg opening to trim those sticking corners too. While you take your time, I will fast forward the video not to bore you. And here are my perfect edges ready for the elastic. But wait. If you're a beginner, and not only, there's one more thing you can do to help you when sewing the elastic. The gusset is formed by 2 layers of fabric, which means when sewing, one layer can run away and the elastic may not catch it. Fix the layers with a straight stitch and no layer will run anymore. Straight stitch is fine here as it acts as basting. And with that in place, we can finally move on to using the sewing machine. I am using my cover locker machine, which is a combined cover stitch and overlock machine. That's why I have that rather big foot. I start slowly, making sure I place the elastic correctly and that my needles catch it. When sewing, one hand guides the fabric towards the foot of the machine, while my other hand ever so slightly pulls and controls the seam at the back. There are 2 things I want to mention here. First, you definitely don't need a cover stitch machine. You can safely and successfully use the zigzag stitch. Second, if you're a beginner seamstress, you might find it difficult to sew the fold-over elastic from one go. You can sew half of the elastic on the wrong side of the fabric. Then, turn your work and sew the second pass. Behind the camera, I sewed all the elastics. First, both leg openings from side seam at the front to side seam at the back. I fold my work because I want to show you that the waist edges were also sewn with elastic. First I did the front. Then, I did the back. These panties surely start to look prettier with every stitch. In fact, we're very close to finishing them. A couple more steps and they will be ready. Here's the hint to what's next, the side seams. For that, I fold my work with the right sides inside. Bring the back on top of the front and align the waist edges. My pretty flowers are hidden for the moment. I need to concentrate on one side seam at a time. Because I used a cover stitch machine, I left longer threads to prevent unraveling. And I start arranging the back and the front along the sideline. Elastics on the waist will sit perfectly on top of each other. To make the seam hold in place, I pin close to the elastics. Then I move to the elastics on the leg opening. You can spot these do not overlap nicely but rather at an angle. That is okay, and is because the front curve is at a different angle than the back leg curve. Mesh is a stubborn fabric. I surely use a pin here too. Let me show you how the stitch will pass from those angled elastics. Can you see the intersection of the outer edges of the elastic? My stitch will start from that exact point and follow the side seam all the way to the elastics on the waist. For this seam I used the straight stitch. The stretch stitch would have been a better choice. But whatever you choose, make sure you secure the portion of the seam where the elastics are. That's because, when wearing the panties, those are the areas under more pressure. One seam is done, just as I told you, following the edges and tightening where the elastics are. Backstage I did the second seam as well, so we can move on quickly. With the side seams done, I can now trim the excess threads and elastic ends. The area where the elastics are is rather thick. I take my time to cut one by one. Then move on to the second side seam and trim there too. Alright, here's my in-progress seam. Spot where my front is and where my back is. I will flip the seam allowances towards the back. A zigzag stitch will run along the edges of my seam allowances. This way my side seams will flatten out and not bulk up when I wear these panties. But wait! Can you see what a thick knot those two elastics create? I don't want that. It's bulky for me, and it's bulky for my machine. So I grab my scissors and I carefully trim the seam allowance. It is important to note here that I trim only the seam allowance for the back. Here, look. The seam allowance from the front will cover the shorter one from the back. And it's no longer so bulky. I did that for one side. I have to do it for my second side seam. Again, I peek where the front is and select and trim the seam allowance on the back only. You do this at your own pace. But I speed up because I want to show you when it's done so I can jump to my sewing machine. Behind the camera, I stitched a small zigzag. This is how it looks. No rebel seam allowances anymore. Everything is flat and clean. See the elastic portion? I ran the zigzag twice there, to secure the area, both at the waist and at the leg opening. And this is how my finished side seam looks on the front. Some Yankee stitching because I was too excited and impatient. Nonetheless, it is a clean finish with beautiful elastic edges. Are these ready yet?
Yes,
they are ready. This is my front with the two flowers and the decoration stitch. Very pretty. And this is the back. All from stretch mesh. And fold over elastic on every edge. an ethereal look for a delicate lingerie item. Thanks for watching. Don't hesitate to ask in the comments section if you have any questions. I will do my best to help you so you can make something similar. And if you liked my YouTube tutorial endeavor, please consider subscribing to my channel. Any feedback is also welcome. Till next time.